It's fortunate for me, as a comic and an author, that if you are born and raised Jewish, there is always more to say about it. A whole lot more. It's endless, in fact. One might say Judaism is not merely a religion, but a perfect neurosis. And every Sunday for years, I brought my quarters to the temple to help buy trees to be planted in Israel. I never saw any pictures of trees, so maybe, in retrospect, I was helping chip in for a fighter plane or a bazooka. I understood it, but it didn't work for me. As much as I wanted the state of Israel to survive, I didn't want to be a part of the state of Israel. All of the attempts they made to try and get me to feel a deep identification with Israel fell on ears that went from deaf to deafer. Hell, I just wanted to play ball. I don't think it helped that my grandfather, as a young man, had gone to Israel when it was still Palestine, early in the 20th century. It wasn't even a country at that point. It was a protectorate. He didn't last long there. Didn't like it there at all. His memories about it no doubt influenced my feelings. But more than that, it was when I read Kurt Vonnegut's Cat's Cradle that I really understood my feelings about Israel. It's there that I read about grand falloons and other false groupings. I felt like a Jew. I was a Jew. But I was not by any stretch of the imagination an Israeli. Sure, we shared a bar mitzvah. Sure, it was where my religion was born. But like it or not, it was not my country. This also probably affected my feelings about being a Jew. I wasn't going to let them sucker me. I'm not stupid. One of the good things about a bar mitzvah is it is a solid background for when you have to get up in front of class and speak to the room. It also gave me my first joke as a stand-up. To wit, I broke into show business when I was very young. I was bar mitzvahed. That's a stand-up gig we Jews have. Say a few prayers over a credit card, bam, you're a man. It marks the passage to puberty, but not its cure. There is no book of the Bible that deals with puberty. I made $1,200 that day in a set of golf clubs. That would be worth about $10,000 today. When my dad saw the cash flow in, he quit his job, and we moved from town to village where Jews dwelled, and we would put on another bar mitzvah. It didn't kill, but at least it sounded like a joke. It was a start. While my bar mitzvah was a simple catered affair, bar mitzvahs today are completely out of control. Money is no object. Hundreds of thousands of dollars can be spent on the food, the hired entertainment, and the themes or locations. It can be an all-day affair that takes place at some exotic locale and can stretch from breakfast through dinner, where a major rock and roll star can perform. Sometimes the guests are flown to another state or even country. Religious events become a spectacle the ancient Romans would drool over. These days, enough is never enough. Enough is what the neighbors do. It's like a Jewish Cirque du Soleil, but with more noshes. Even more insane than the bar mitzvah can be. A bark mitzvah was held in New York City at the Boathouse in Central Park. My psychiatrist, Martha, heard about it from a friend who went to it. She and her dog, that is. That's right. A bar mitzvah was held for a dog, and people attended and brought their dogs. She invited her friends and the dogs of her friends. I wish Martha had gone so I could tell you more, but just let your imagination run wild. How does someone have a bar mitzvah for a dog and not end up committed? Couldn't a psychiatrist have taken out papers on this lady just for her own good? My bar mitzvah probably didn't hold a candle to the treatment that dog got. In that time, I realized the really nice thing about Judaism, and Catholicism for that matter, is that it removes you from society and, for all intents and purposes, puts you in the role of the outsider for a brief time each week. It therefore helps you empathize with those who are different from you. Not bad, considering I was being raised in a country where as much as people want to be the same, they are truly different. Understanding that you are different also helps you feel a little bit special, and that's a good thing. Unless, of course, you are living in one of those neighborhoods where if you're a little bit different, they like to kick your ass for the fun of it. What makes the Jewish Sunday school experience different from all other religious training is the haunting memory of the Holocaust. We Jews don't ever want to forget, or let the world forget, what happened in Hitler's Germany. It's an admirable mission that is excellent in theory, but can be borderline insane when it comes to practice. You see, the adult Jewish community wanted us kids to know all about the Holocaust. So, on a very regular basis from around the time I was 10, I was exposed to one documentary after another, and each seemed to feature some of the most horrific footage known to mankind. The names of the camps were pounded into my head like a train scheduled to hell. Treblinka, Bergen-Belsen, Auschwitz, Dachau. I don't think it was really very healthy for me to be viewing that footage in the innocence of my youth. Nope, not good at all. By the time I was 12, I felt like I had seen every Jew killed about 8 times over. Combine this with a reading list on the subject, and I am amazed I can walk without braces on my legs or a breathing apparatus trailing behind me on wheels. I also never have found any of our holidays to be a big draw. Now, Passover is really quite beautiful, I will admit, in all its commemoration of our leaving Egypt and crossing the desert, as the comedian Ron Zimmerman once said long ago, in order to be free to settle in Miami Beach. Christianity has nothing like it. What spoiled Passover for me was a visit my family took when I was 12 to see my grandmother and her third husband at a hotel near Spring Valley, New York, to celebrate the holiday with them. There were hundreds of people at a huge catered Seder, the ritual meal of Passover. It was my step-grandfather's last supper, so to speak, as it was clear at that point that he was dying. There were many elderly people in attendance. It was an Orthodox rabbi who led us through the meal, in Hebrew, but you could hardly hear him for the chaos in the room. It was like a Sunday brunch at a Hyatt. Kids running amok, and parents alternately screaming at their offspring to behave better and at their waiter to serve better. It was appalling. I may not believe, but I believe if you are in the presence of believers, you should show a little respect for their beliefs. As much as I don't like rituals, I do respect them, and I understand the need for them. There are things about the Jewish religion that I carry with me to this day. Chief among them is Yom Kippur, or the Day of Atonement, as it's so happily called. It had a profound effect on my innocent young mind. The service opens with the organ playing Kol Nidre, one of the spookiest pieces of music ever written. You hear it and are literally surprised that bats and shit aren't flying around. I think Alfred Hitchcock based all of his film scores on it. As the service proceeds, you learn that Yom Kippur is the day that one atones for all of the sins that were committed over the past year. This, the rabbi intones, is the day that God puts your name in the book of life or the book of death. How sweet is that? The book of death? Are you kidding me? That's a hell of a concept for an 8-year-old to deal with. Until then, my own death wasn't something I had even considered. So what flashed across my mind as I recounted my numerous sins, which were conveniently printed in my prayer book, was an aged God with hands trembling as they hovered over the book of death. In one of those arthritic hands, I imagined a pen, and as he got closer to the book, I saw his hand shake ever so slightly and watched as a drop of ink fell to the parchment. I further imagined that God stared at the drop for a moment and, almost as an afterthought, in the most beautiful cursive penmanship, proceeded to write the name Lewis Black. In short, the whole idea of a book of death rattled the bars of the little cage that was my existence. I became obsessed with it, and I set out to prevent God from making any mistakes when it came to me. I was going to make sure that I never had another bad thought or did a bad deed, figuring that was all it would take to make God leave me alone. Considering I was just 8, there really wasn't much I could do to stop God from doling out the ultimate punishment. But since I was, in fact, merely 8 years old, I didn't know that. So I came up with a plan. Whenever I had a bad thought, I had to immediately say, "I am sorry, God." I did this for a while, but then I figured it might not be enough. That's when I decided to add, "Please forgive me." This, I thought, was the only way to make sure that God would have to participate. In truth, I hadn't really had very many bad thoughts until I heard about the Book of Death. When I knew of its existence, however, it seemed I couldn't stop having them. I wished ill health on my teachers. I wished that my classmates would flunk their tests. I wished that my parents would like me more than they liked my brother. I wished for a lot of bad things. I don't really think I wanted the bad things to happen. I think I just wanted God to know how sorry I could be and maybe give me some extra credit. This lunacy on my part grew in leaps and bounds. It was no longer enough to say, "I am sorry, God, please forgive me," just once. No, in just a short period it became 5 times, and then 10, and then it grew to multiples of 10. I couldn't be sure how much sorry God really wanted from me, and I wanted to give him as much as possible. At first, this was all done in silence, but soon I felt compelled to whisper it, as if God needed to hear me to know that I really meant it. I then continued to embellish my tapestry of prayer. I added an inhale after God and an exhale after me. Soon this became the major activity of my life. I wasn't paying much attention in school anymore because I was too busy fending off an angry God to worry about spelling, math, or my notebooks. I might as well have been spending all day at the temple because there I sat in the midst of my class, davening away like an Orthodox Jew. The classmates who sat near me must have thought I was nuts. And I was. My grades began to plummet and my parents began to worry. I was taken to a counselor. I have no idea what kind of counselor, but he was definitely some sort of adult authority figure. I don't remember him. I just remember stopping the behavior. I was probably more afraid of my parents than I was of God. And therein lies the problem with Yom Kippur. It doesn't take into account the highly vulnerable trigger mechanism of a child with obsessive-compulsive disorder. But Yom Kippur wasn't the end of my religious training. I attended Sunday school until I was confirmed, which meant I went until I was 15. My dad had made a deal with my brother and me. He would attend lectures in Judaism every Sunday, and we would go to Sunday school. Once we were confirmed, the bargain went, we could decide if we wanted to continue practicing the faith of our fathers. As would he, depending on how he felt at the time. In retrospect, as long as he was negotiating, I should have cut a better deal. What I should have said was, "Let's call the whole thing off after my bar mitzvah." Unfortunately, I wasn't thinking ahead. I have to say that my education in the Jewish religion was excellent. It was thorough, both from historic and biblical standpoints. So, when at the age of 15 I was confirmed and made my choice about practicing the faith of my fathers, it was based on knowledge. Maybe they shouldn't have taught me so well, because it probably led to too much thinking. Since that day, I have only entered a temple in order to perform. For reasons that escape me, I've been asked to perform in a few temples. Yep, they have to pay me to go into the house of the Lord. One of the papers I wrote for my confirmation class, yes, we had to write papers, was a real eye-opener. I discovered a story about a very wealthy and deeply religious man. He wondered if it made a real difference whether one followed a spiritual path or a path of dissoluteness. In other words, if one chose to be a saint or a sinner. So he quit his upright life and went down the road of sin. He broke one biblical law after another. He consorted with hookers and criminals. And what did he discover? That it made no difference in his life. None. He didn't feel guilty. The Lord didn't punish him for his sins. He concluded that both roads led to the same place. Wow. Even today, that's all I can say to that. You've got to admire a religion that would let that story out, especially to kids. But it sure made me think about whether I wanted to lead an upright life as a Jew or, well, live the life I've been living. I obviously chose the latter. So pass the martini and suck my dick.